Hey friends, welcome back to Heretical Hippies, where Anna and Kari Jo wander back into the wreckage of their deconstruction to see if they can offer hope to anyone else who might be climbing out of the dust and ashes of their faith. Buckle up, it's about to get real.
Beautiful.
Hey, how have you been?
Um, Good. I mean, it's one of those questions. It's like every time somebody asks me, I'm such an honest person. I'm just like all these things
Same.
go through my mind, and I'm like, I want to tell her about this, and this in one answer, you know? It's like I always end up with
Yeah.
but I could answer that question probably for the next hour, really, you know?
Well, I'm here
Um,
for it if you
Same. I was
yeah,
thinking last night or early this morning, I woke up and I was getting excited about recording with you today, and then I was like, "Oh, I wanna ask Kari Jo Howard." I feel like we haven't talked. It's been, like, what, a week or something? A week and a
yeah,
half?
we can have, I think.
Okay, and it's like it
Yeah,
feels like so long
it
since we've talked
does.
to each other.
Well, and I feel like our conversations are so, encouraging and challenging at the same time. It's like a booster shot of something for
Right.
me.
Y
So, yeah,
Same.
I definitely feel like, "Oh, I need my Anna fixed."
So how are you
I'm brutally honest, and I could probably talk for an hour too, but I'm great. Our pool, we're
Uh-huh.
finally filling it with water. It's, like,
Nice.
nearly to the spot where we have to turn the water off.
Oh,
And it has been, like, a fiasco, like, I could go on forever about that, but first world problems, right? I mean, we're putting in a
sure.
frickin' pool, so, like, get over yourself and just be glad that we have it. But that's, like, really exciting because we started it actually almost 2 years ago, like, with the planning for it, and then we got delayed because of financial stuff, and the actual process began, like, last May, so it's been almost a year of
Wow.
actual, actually making progress on it, and so I don't know, like, I think it's interesting because, yeah, it's a stupid pool, blah, 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 like, whatever, who cares, right? But, like, it has actually taught me a lot about what I what my body and mind kinda craves for equilibrium because it's been such a long time of, like, everything being up in the air. Like, our backyard has been torn apart and, empty water bottles thrown across the place, like, by the different crews, and, like, it's just a lot of stuff is outside of my control,
Yeah.
and it just looks like shit, like, it's all torn up, it looks terrible,
Mhm.
and I've known this since we lived in Nigeria that I crave visual beauty, like, there's something about me being very visual and an artist, I'm sure, that craves something, like, aesthetically pleasing. And when
Mhm.
I'm constantly like, I sit on my balcony and meditate, and that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at our backyard. So,
Yeah.
like, it's a little bit like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Like, I'm meditating and it's amazing, but I'm looking at this really shitty thing that's a constant reminder of, like, stuff not being settled in my life.
Mhm.
And so that has been an interesting thing to, I don't know, just kinda mull over and not try to, like, get rid of it because that life is not controllable, right? And there's gonna be shitty landscapes metaphorically everywhere in our lives. So, like,
Mhm.
how do I make peace with that? And how do I don't know, like, how do I find a good mental state not filled with anxiety or whatever it's bringing up in me? Like, how do I balance that? How do I make space for that? Because that's probably gonna be my reality, like, having those anxious reactions or whatever to stuff I
Mhm.
can't control, but that's what my religious trauma coach was talking to me about last week was actually, it's really cool. It's a Buddhist story that he told me, and there's a master who's, kind of, like, taken a younger monk, like, under his wing and, teaching, mentoring type thing,
Mhm.
and they would go sit outside this village and they would beg and ask for alms, and some people would give and be kind and many people would like throw food at them and yell
Mhm.
at them and curse them and stuff, and the master didn't seem to be phased by this, but the young apprentice was kind of like, you couldn't get over it, like, this is so incredulous, I can't believe people are treating me like this. And so this went on for weeks, months, and the young one asks the master, well, how does this not bother you? And so the master said, "I want you to bring me an empty cup and a cup full of salt, and I'll teach you." And so the young guy gets the things, brings it to him, and, they go down by a river, and the master says, "Okay, fill the empty cup with water and take a spoonful of the salt and put it in the cup, and now take a drink." And so the apprentice drinks it, and the master says, "Okay, what is that experience for you?" And he's like, "Well, it tastes salty." He's like, "Okay, yeah, that's what I expected." And the master said, "Okay, now dump the rest of the salt in the river." And so he dumps the salt in the river, and then he tells the apprentice, "Okay, now take your cup, dip it in the river, and take a drink." And he takes a drink. He's like, "Okay, what is that for you?" And he's like, "Well, it's not salty." And the master said, "Well, yeah, exactly, because the cup of water is a very small entity and it doesn't have capacity for all of that salt. But
Mm,
the river is a wide body and it the salt doesn't affect it." And he said, "As an ascended master, I have enlarged my sense of self
mm,
to make space for and to accommodate for the salt of life." And
mhm.
the apprentice, he's like, You are the small cup full of water. You have not gotten there yet. So those insults, the people throwing things at us, like that feels very salty to you."
Yeah,
And I was like, "Oh my gosh," like, that was I've never heard that. I've never heard
I
that
haven't
story.
either.
Yeah, and it was really beautiful, and it made me realize, "Okay, I can apply that to this stupid backyard being torn up and looking like shit. I can just make space for that and somehow find beauty in that, like, change my like, have a paradigm shift about it." And
Yeah,
so, anyway, like I said, I could talk for an hour about how I'm doing because
that's a really cool picture. It's something I might share with my kids, you know?
Yeah, it really
Um,
is.
I love Buddhist, little parables like that.
I
They're
do
so
too.
fun they really connect with where I'm at in life, and I enjoy them.
I agree. And
Mhm.
also, I also like that they are acknowledged as stories, like, they're just acknowledged as, like, these object lessons, whereas,
Mhm.
like, in evangelical Christianity, the parables, yeah, we know that Jesus used them for that, but
Mhm.
it also somehow, like, we're taught to believe, like, this actually happened or that
Yeah.
this is, like, a literal event, and we need to, like, plan our lives accordingly to this literal
Mhm.
happening, and it's like, "No." I don't know. Anyway, so, like, yeah, no pun intended, but it does make me a little bit salty about about the way we were taught to view parables in Christianity. I just think the way Buddhists promote those teachings is so beautiful and metaphorical and almost poetic.
Yeah. It is beautiful. It's interesting that that story brings me to this really interesting part this morning. So my dad passed away last June, and I don't have a we're going to talk about the afterlife today, right?
Yes, 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 yes.
I don't really have a strong feeling about the afterlife. I have lots of beautiful ideas, right?
Yeah,
I speculate wildly, which
right.
is kind of so fun, and in a way can take the sting of death a little bit away, It's like, oh, it could
Mhm.
be any number of amazing, crazy, wild situations that we get ourselves in?
Right.
And even if it is as simple as just we don't exist anymore, it won't hurt.
Exactly. Right, there's no fear
You
in that.
know? Right?
Yes.
Um, but so when my father passed away, he had a huge library of books. He carried with him everywhere whenever he moved. I mean, he didn't move often, but when he did, the books were always the thing. Like, don't forget the books. And it's like boxes and boxes of books that he had collected since high school. Actually, no, since he was a child.
Wow.
No joke. And he died at 82. So, I had his Bible when he was 8 years old.
Aw.
I mean, I had books that he read throughout school and high school. Most of the collection was high school and up. And my father was a Christian, so he had a lot of Christian influence type books, but he also lived in Japan for a few years when he was in the army during
Wow.
Vietnam. And so he was heavily influenced by that experience, and it affected his life for the rest of his life. I mean, even till the day he died, it was part of who he was, whether it was discussion about things, that he learned there, even joking around and speaking to me in Japanese, like, just
Wow.
so many things about that experience changed and morphed who he was as a person. So, most of the books I had not read, or even looked at really, because there were so many of them. And, but there was this one when he passed away, my brother and I went through the collection and we took out the books that we wanted to keep, and there was a book in it that I was really interested in, but I haven't picked up and started reading yet, called The Life and Teaching of the Masters of the Far East.
Ooh.
It's written by a man named Baird T. Spalding, and basically, supposedly, Mr. Spalding actually experienced what he wrote about in this book. And I'll just tell you, the volume 1 is the one we have, and it's the, introduction to the Master Emil. They visit the Temple of Silence, and they talk about astral projection, walking on water, visit in the healing temple, and new light on the teachings of Jesus.
Mm.
And I read the introduction and the foreword, and, it's basically talking about this guy is talking about these people, these masters, these, kind of invisible masters of the Far East that were, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, were actually performing miracles.
Wow.
And, he doesn't have any proof of it,
Sure.
he has no, but supposedly he lived among them for a number of years. And so when I was and it's not so much about whether or not this book is true, although holy cow, I'd love it if it was. Right? I
Yeah.
mean, who wouldn't love to believe that the miracles of Jesus were actually possible? It's just most people don't know how to do it,
Right.
or have the formula or whatever. But for me, it was more or less like discovering that my dad had this book.
Mm. Yeah, that's really cool.
Was probably, like, I always knew that he had researched Far East teachings, and learned about them, but this book to me hit a new level of interest that I didn't know he had.
Mm.
And, I don't know, I don't know what I believe about the afterlife. I love the idea that our ancestors can speak to us, but I don't really know how that works. Or, I listened to the podcast you shared with me the other day
Yeah.
about this woman who literally, truly believes that everybody has the capacity to speak to the dead,
Yeah.
and and then, I had that tarot reading from my friend, Amy, who obviously, believes that her ancestors guide her in her readings. And she's not pressuring me, but she's encouraging me to open up that side of myself,
Mm.
that, well, just to open my mind to the possibility that this is possible, just this is possible.
Right.
She is hoping that it would be a way that would release within me some things that need to be released, some creative energy that needs to be and I guess in a way you could just look at that as healing. Everybody needs creative energy released, right?
Right.
And so anyway, I there's been one time since my dad passed. I was sitting at a red light, and all of a sudden it was months later. Was months later, and I had not really talked to him or tried to talk to him or anything. And I know it sounds crazy. I mean, in my mind it does. And that's why it was months before I ever tried it. But when I was at this red light, I don't know, it was just this overwhelming feeling of wanting to talk to my dad.
Mm.
And, sorry.
No, you're good.
And I broke down at this red light. Just came to me out of the blue like grief usually does.
Mhm.
I just started talking, and, it felt so it was like a release, like, "Oh my god, I needed to do this." And, I haven't since then. I mean, it's been, what, many months. It's been almost a year since he passed, and I haven't done it since. But when I started reading that book this morning, Ricky found it in the collection of books that I got from my dad. He picked it up early this morning and he was like, "What the heck is this?" You know? So I started reading it and I was just like, "Oh my god, it just feels like even if my dad didn't intend for it to, he is meeting me in this place this morning." And yeah, it was beautiful and shit, I still don't know what I think about the afterlife. But today we're gonna talk about it, and we're gonna speculate wildly, and I'm excited about that. So,
Me too.
thank you too for sharing that podcast. I listened to another one late last night about it's one I've listened to before, I've shared it with you, and I'll share it with the listeners today. But, um but yeah, I'm excited about getting into this conversation.
Me too. I wanna go back to what you shared about, like, you're still not sure what you believe or think about, deceased relatives communicating or whatever. I also don't. I mean, I don't have any personal experiences with that yet. I think I will, but I don't yet. So this was many months ago. I was sitting outside meditating, and I feel like that's when I have, like, a lot of kind of aha moments, just when I let my mind relax, it's kinda like shower thoughts, I guess. That's my equivalent of shower thoughts because I don't spend a lot of time in the shower. But anyway, I mean, I'm clean, don't get me wrong. I don't linger in the shower, okay? So, people, don't worry. I have good hygiene. But yeah, like, I realized if a butterfly flying past me in a moment speaks to me in a way, like, if it holds meaning in some significant way, it can. Like, I have permission to allow that to speak to me. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to speak to me every time I see a butterfly. Like, I think that's probably a more shackled way to live than I wanna live if have to find meaning in every fucking butterfly I see. No, like, that's
Mhm.
stupid. But if it is connecting with me and resonating with me on some level, I'm just allowing it to hold that meaning, because before that,
Mm,
like, I wasn't allowed to assign meaning to things. Like, I was told what held meaning, right? Like, it was
mhm.
curated for me through the evangelical system of, this is how you connect with God. This is how it should feel. And nobody said that or spoke that, but it was all demonstrated for us, right? So yeah, I have found a lot of freedom and a lot of profound points of connection that I think I've been missing out on my whole life
Mm.
because of feeling so bound to a certain set of unspoken rules or expectations in my experiences. So that's what I was thinking when you were saying, at the stoplight, that was what you needed and it was healing, and you were communicating with your father, and whether or not you actually were and his spirit was there, I don't know, who's to know? Like, we can't prove that. It's not
Mhm.
quantifiable, but I mean, why can't it be that? Why can't it be that he was sitting right there in the passenger seat next to you, you know? Like, I've just given myself permission to be a meaning maker in my life, and
Mm.
I feel like I was never given that autonomy before. So, yeah, that's just kind of what I was
Beautiful.
thinking of when you were sharing that.
Meaning maker, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Mhm.
like, I remember we were told, like, "Our hearts are idol factories." I don't know if you ever heard that.
No.
In Christianity, yeah, like, the human heart is an idol factory, and, like, I kind of glommed onto that because, like, that's pretty clever, right? Like, "Oh, yeah, and we do that," but that's meaning making. That is
Yeah,
legitimately trying to make sense of our experience. I don't agree with the idol making anymore, but, like, it resonated with me on some level, and so I kinda just rephrased, like, retermed that, I guess, for my own sanity.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I like that term. That's awesome. Yeah, it makes me think that meaning making is really just the choice of belief, you know?
Right.
Like, we're choosing to believe, and there's no if there's no harm in it, and it really is the like, what is harm, you know? Like, whether if it's not true or if it's not proven to be true or something that, like you said, is quantifiable, something measurable, then is it still something worth doing? You
Right.
know? And that is a challenging trajectory, I think, that a lot of people coming out of religion are going towards, because what I'm seeing a lot, and I know there's variables, but people are moving towards this really science-driven way of thinking, or they'll latch on to some other type of mystical religious experience,
Mhm.
you know? There's not a lot of in between.
Right.
And so finding that, and that seems to be normal, we tend to polarize when we're coming out of something that maybe wasn't the best experience,
Right.
or that we're running from, we tend to polarize ourselves. But finding that place is in the middle is kind of somewhere I'm trying to be, because the world is mystical and there is so much speculation that we have to choose to do in order to make sense of it all,
Right.
because we still don't have those measure data that can explain everything for us. They still don't even understand consciousness itself,
Right.
so how can we have science show us everything? We can't yet, maybe one day we will.
Right.
you know
Right. We're just not there
um
yet.
right. And the measure of science is so broad. Everybody wants peer reviewed data, right? And it's like, well, that's good, and that's then that is probably true, most likely true in those situations. But then there's also these other scientists and researchers that are putting together information that's not on a grander scale, or, funded by large companies or whatever, but it still has some value to it,
Right.
And so yeah, this world that we're getting into of spirit, this world of spirituality is a still such a vast ocean that we get to swim in. It's can be a lot of fun if you allow it to be. Like you were saying,
Right.
you can be your own meaning maker.
Yes, and to let go of the fear that a lot of Christianity purports, they instill fear of a lot of these unknown, kind of mysterious ways of viewing things, or they label certain experiences as demonic, or I mean, I don't know, like, I could give a
Mhm.
lot of examples, but if anyone has swam in those streams, they know what I'm talking about. Like, there's just so much boundary making in that space that once you are allowed, or you give yourself permission rather, to venture into those territories and those arenas, it's it's fascinating. Like, it's far more mysterious and much less fearful, like, it's but it also, to your point, Anna, with science, obviously, you and I both agree that science is very important and I believe should be used to inform our experiences as much as is useful. I
Mhm.
think the mysterious is what drives scientists, right? They're trying to answer questions. And so, like,
Sure.
they kind of hold hands, the mystery and science, because without the mystery, what is science trying to prove, right? Like, if we had all the answers, there'd be no need for scientific discoveries and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's interesting, perceived as opposite ends of the spectrum, mystery versus cold hard scientific fact. And it's not like they have to coexist. It's much like joy and sorrow. I feel like you can't fully experience joy if you don't know what sorrow feels like.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
I think the challenging part is that we have such short lives, and we get to learn about the science of our day and what's being discovered and the answers and the truths that are being revealed through it, but there's still so much more, you
right.
know? So we that's the part where we speculate wildly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because in our lifetime, I'm sure that there are gonna be questions that I have that are not gonna be answered by science yet,
Right.
and so that's really what we're doing today is to and, and also too, when I was preparing for our discussion about the afterlife, I was thinking, gosh, you can't really talk about the afterlife without having some type of origin story. I mean, you can, but it's so hard
Right.
not to impose like, well, I believe that aliens implanted this planet. Therefore, when I die, I get to go back and be with the
Right.
aliens or whatever it
Right, you
is,
have to give context.
Right, exactly. You can't just say, "Yeah, I think we go live with
Yeah.
aliens." It's like, "Well, wait a minute. What does that mean?"
Yeah, so, okay, you wanna
So
kick us off? Do you wanna start by sharing kind of where
sure.
you were with afterlife belief and maybe how where you are today, how you got there?
Yeah, I grew up believing in heaven and hell, probably, I'm assuming. Like you were, I assume?
Yep, definitely.
Okay. Yeah. And, Gosh, it's funny because I have notes on this, but it's like I lived it. So, I think the main thing was just it was a common knowledge among the people that I was around that if you believed in Jesus and accepted him as your Lord and Savior, you got to go to heaven
Mhm.
to be with him after you died. And if you didn't, it was really simple. You didn't get to go to heaven and you went to hell where you lived forever in a fiery pit with Satan,
Right.
right? But that was a common knowledge among the people that I was around, my parents included. But then there was the once saved, always saved, or can you actually be once saved, always
Right.
saved, and that whole thing. But we won't get into that today. But yeah, it was just a common knowledge. So it wasn't until and there's not really much else to say about that.
Mhm.
It was really basic for me, at least. It was just heaven or hell. Those were your
Yeah,
options.
same.
It motivated me greatly though in my efforts as young adult and adult to communicate with people about Jesus's love,
Yep.
right? Like it was highly motivating because what the frick,
Right.
like who the heck wants to go to
Yeah,
hell, right?
exactly.
Um, so yeah, so that was my experience within Christianity. It evolved though when I got into Hebrew roots. I started learning about nihilism and nihilistic perspectives and started realizing that that was much more of a Hebrew perspective. Probably the early church,
Can you explain
most
that in a
likely.
nutshell if people haven't heard that term before?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's really just the people of Jesus's time. And especially shortly after his passing, the church that started growing at that time was in Israel. And so the Hebrew people were the ones that initially took up the torch of his message and chose to believe in him. And the churches that started growing as a result of that, all it's baffling to me. Most Christians really don't know this, and I didn't for such a long time. They all really were just interpreting the whole experience and the story that was being passed down through their own lenses. And there was no regulatory perspective on how to perceive what was happening. And so there were many different ideas about what it looked like to walk out as a Christian and what happened to you after death. But when before that, a lot of what fueled their perspectives were the growing for many thousands of years now, the Hebrew Jewish perspective was what fueled a lot of people's ideas. And why wouldn't it be? Because Jesus was a Jew, right?
Right.
And so the Hebrew perspective would have been that I mean you talk about like they carried the bones of their ancestors when they traveled through the desert. They believed that they were with them and that their bodies had decayed, but their spirits were with them.
Mm.
And at least that's one perspective. But that those who weren't of God were actually they just died. They just went away. And the people that were followers of God who actually obeyed God actually got wait in a waiting place, and then they got to rise from the at a time when God deemed
Mm.
necessary. That was the Christian perspective that
Yeah.
evolved. And so yeah, it was, and there were other ones too. There were other perspectives that rose up about the afterlife. It was not just like one single, it was like many different ones that started evolving. As you can imagine, people speculated wildly,
Right.
like we're going to do today,
Yeah.
right? What about you?
Um, Pretty similar, but we diverge at the Hebrew roots because I obviously was never part of that. So I was not exposed to, was it annihilationism? Is that the right word? Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
until like in the last year or so. Um, but yeah, I carried the weight of having to witness to people any chance I got because I clearly didn't want anybody to burn in hell. Um,
Mhm.
so yes, that that was a a burden that I gladly strapped to my chest, I guess, for all those Christian years, but let me side note, I'm so happy to be free of that. Like,
Yeah.
oh, it's such a sigh of relief to not have to worry about people's eternal destiny anymore. And that's because I no longer believe hell as we're taught in the church is a thing. It's not a place. It's not a burning, fiery place where people go for eternal conscious torment. But I also believed in heaven, and I I really believed literally about the things that were described in Revelation in particular. Streets of gold, and
Right.
Jesus coming down from the clouds. We're gonna meet him in the sky. In fact, like, I talk about speculating wildly. This is hilarious. And my kids would corroborate this. So, I would often, like, when we were missionaries, we were, like, hardcore in it, right? Um, we would joke about when kind of joke, but not joke, like, also serious, but, like, be excited about when Jesus returns because we were hoping that it was gonna be soon because what better thing than to, be caught up in the clouds with Christ and go to heaven with him, right? And
Right.
so they knew about that teaching, like, we made that clear to them that that was gonna happen someday, and I would tell them, "I cannot wait for Jesus to come back because when I'm up in the air, when I'm going up into the sky, I'm gonna rip my insulin pump off and chuck it to the ground as hard as I can because I'm gonna get a new body, I'll have a pancreas that works," and it just is like that is I mean, it's hilarious in and of itself, but it's also, like, really embarrassing that, like, I actually thought that I was gonna be caught up in the clouds. But, that's what I was taught, and I swallowed everything whole, so it made sense that I believed that. But, yeah, like, I
Mhm.
literally believed that we were gonna be caught up with him and be taken to heaven. But I have a confession to make because a lot of what was taught about heaven, right? Like, there's gonna be a mansion specifically designed for you. And then I remember thinking,
Mhm.
"Oh my gosh, I don't wanna be in such a huge house if nobody else is living with me, like, if it's just me in that huge mansion, like, I'm a people person, like, that is gonna suck." And then so I remember, like, I would actually pray and ask God to, like, at least make it entertaining, so, like, I could paint the walls or something or, like, like, enjoy my time in this huge mansion. And then, also, I remember thinking that are you frigging kidding me? We're just gonna worship the whole time? That sounds like the most boring eternity ever. And I mean, like, I kind of tried to, like, slightly vocalize that on occasion, but it was like, it just felt so icky to say that at the
Mhm.
time. But now it's like I look at those views that I had and what I thought the afterlife was gonna be. And honestly, no matter how pretty they tried to paint this afterlife in heaven, worshiping Jesus around the throne for eternity, I was just like, dude, I hope my attitude changes because that's gonna suck. Really, and not that I didn't like Jesus, like, yeah, I felt like he was worthy of worship and blah, 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 but, like, for all of eternity, you've got to be kidding. So,
Right.
anyway, that's kind of as where I've come from.
I
Yeah.
remember starting to speculate wildly when I started to sort of when I got old enough to really think about, like, what you're talking about. Even within Christianity, I would like, "Okay, well, there has to be more than that, right?" Like, even this earth is more fun than that
Exactly.
idea, you
Exactly. I was like, "You're
know?
this heaven you're painting is, like, kinda shitty."
Right? So it's like, okay, surely and so I did give God a little bit more credit. Later on in my adulthood, I started thinking, okay, there has to be more than this. Like, what if we get to fly and we get,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
exactly.
we get to like not just create, we get to create like almost like he does, or what if we get to like do things like that seem magical to us now,
Right.
right? Or what if my house is actually Harry Potter's castle,
Right.
and it's and all the friends and family that I've ever got to love in my lifetime were in that castle with me, and we get to be wizards
Yeah.
together or something like I started speculating then, and I think it's so fun that I gave myself the freedom to do that. But it's like it's not taught, and it was definitely something I had to choose. I'm gonna choose the freedom to think outside of this box and do my own thing. And that's still what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
I still hope that there's a Harry Potter house in heaven that I
Right.
get to go
That would be
with
amazing.
them.
I wanna
I
try on
know.
your invisibility cloak.
I will think about that because I wear it most of the time, so.
So funny.
So, yeah, once I came out of Christianity, I'd like to know from you, Carrie Jo, when you first really let go of your walk as a Christian, what was one of your first thoughts about the afterlife that came?
I think I started right away, not right away, but, like, early on after letting go of that stuff, I started to wonder about reincarnation. I wanna preface this too, though, that I have 0 evidence for or reason really for believing any of this. Again, this is the wild speculation part, so, although, like, there are things that make me wonder because I am attracted to cultures of all kinds, like, especially Asian things, but I mean, also African things. I mean, before I even went to Nigeria, like this is in high school before I was a Christian, I did a research paper on African art. I read any slave autobiography I could get my hands on. So it's like that's a really quirky, weird thing for a middle class white girl to be interested in, like no
Yeah.
idea why. But as I look
Mhm.
back on that, I'm kind of like, huh, maybe I was a slave, Like, I don't know. I don't know if I had a previous life in the slave world. It's
Uh-huh.
possible. And then also, like, the Asian stuff, like, I mean, if you walk through my house, like, you'll find a lot of Asian, like, furniture and things that I've found in thrift stores and whatnot. And it's like, I can't explain that. I mean, yeah, it's beautiful. That's part of it. It's beautiful, but, like, on some level, it's like I vibe with that or it resonates with me in some way. And so I've also wondered, was I like an Asian master at some point? Or
Mhm.
Indian food? Okay, this is gonna sound really weird, and I've talked about food before and Indian food, how I love it so much. But Indian food specifically speaks to my soul in a way that I feel like I have a deeper connection with it. Like I have an actual spiritual some connection with Indian food. People are probably
Wow.
rolling their eyes or thinking like, "Dude, stop smoking the bad stuff." Like, but for real, like it just this is where I speculate because it just makes me wonder like why? Why would I have such a strong deep connection with the flavors of Indian food? Like
With
maybe
more.
I was and I'm a yoga instructor too, right? Like I don't know, like I
Uh-huh.
wonder if I have past lives.
Yeah.
It's fun to think about, to like think about maybe I was an ascended, you'd have to be a male to be an ascended master. Maybe I was like a male guru or something, or I don't know. So,
Mhm.
yeah, reincarnation definitely it piques my interest big time. And then Cyrus, my youngest kid, this is the last thing I'll say about reincarnation, and then I want to hear about you. But since he was able to communicate, and have conversations with us, there's something clearly different about him. Like he contains a depth of wisdom and knowledge that can't be explained. It doesn't match up with his age. And I genuinely wonder, like, how many lives he's had because of that, because
Mhm.
he will come up with such remarkable wisdom for me, like, I'm talking about a situation in my life or, like, a relationship struggle or something with a friend or whatever, and he will speak into that, and I just, like, look at him and think, "Who the hell are you? Like, how do you know this?" I mean, it's, like, just so smart and so like, it looks and sounds like he has had life experience that I haven't, and he's only 15. And so I just
Yeah.
wonder, I so that's what makes me
Is
be
he
curious.
your youngest, you
He's my
said?
youngest, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. My youngest daughter and my youngest son are had that give me that same feeling. Like, I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, who are you?
Mhm.
How many lives have you lived, and how do you know this already?" Even at a very young age, yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because my youngest daughter is very much I definitely, seeking to understand, more as an adult. I mean, all of my kids do, but she definitely has a, unique perspective on her spiritual journey, and it's beautiful to
Mhm.
watch. And so, anyway, I say all that as far as, uh, past lives go for myself, like, you mentioned what was it that you did? What did you do? Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. What do you mean?
That you said when you were younger and you were interested in something.
Oh, yeah, that I wrote a research paper on African art, and I
That's
read
it.
all the slave
African art.
autobiographies I could get my hands on.
It's that kinda stuff does baffle me, though, because not every kid how old were you then?
I mean, I started to read those books probably when I was in 8th or ninth grade, so 14,
Yeah.
15.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like that's a really unique that's a time I see a pattern in, like, where things kinda start shifting,
Mm,
between 12 and 14, where interest starts to go beyond outside of our family,
right,
outside of our little, network of people, and the interest that we start taking around that age really is telling, I think, of something deeper within us,
mhm,
and I don't say that just because of my own personal experience, but also just watching my own children and helping raise other kids, really. We've lived in community most of our adult lives, and so I've helped raise a lot of kids. Yeah, it's so interesting to me I get kind of excited around that 12, 13 mark. Like
yeah,
who's going to come out, because before then it's so fun, they're so innocent, it's so simple, right? For the
right,
most part. And then, and I've had experiences too where, I'm talking to a 7 or 8-year-old too. And I'm like, wait a minute, what just
right.
came out of your mouth?
Yes.
What did you just do here? But yeah, when I was about in the 8th grade too, and we didn't have internet either when you and I were in the 8th
Right.
grade, It
Exactly.
wasn't like
We're
and it
that
wasn't
old,
like our
people.
teachers right. It wasn't like our teachers were saying, "Hey, why don't you write a paper on African slavery?" Right?
Right,
It was like, no, we were being taught about it, sure, and we did have televisions and we were learning about other cultures, but not near a fraction of the extent that people are today,
right.
right? And so when I was in the 8th grade, I was moved to write a paper on Mahatma Gandhi. And it was I was also really drawn to music of the '60s. And I loved Janis Joplin, and there were just really unique things that were starting to come out of me when I was a kid that I think my parents were like, "Whoa, what's happening here?" Like, "We're a Christian family. Why are you writing about Gandhi?" Um, so yeah, I had that same experience where as I was growing up, I was interested in things that I think were outside of the box, even though I was still a Christian.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's fun to speculate, isn't it? Why? Why are we maybe because it's interesting, maybe because we're drawn to beautiful and exciting people that are doing good work. Maybe we're drawn to understanding who we are as a species and why we do the things we do. Maybe you could write it off as that,
Maybe.
but maybe you could also speculate wildly with us for
Right,
fun. And you know what's
exactly.
funny?
It's fun.
I also see us doing this like you're saying earlier. I know what people are thinking. It's like, you know what? Let's just try for the rest of just this episode to not give a fuck what people think.
Yeah, I hear that. Oh, I'm all I'm all on board for that.
Awesome. So yeah, reincarnation was a big thing for me too. But I will say, going back a step, initially when I accepted the very real reality that I could not understand or receive the scriptures in a literal sense, and when I first started realizing that what that might imply about heaven and hell, I got really scared.
Mm,
Like I had a real fear come over my whole
mhm.
body because I knew I was like, "Wait a minute, then what?" Like, that does that mean I don't get like, I went the other extreme and just started thinking about annihilism,
Okay.
right? Like and then I already toyed with the idea within Christianity and understanding that the different perspectives, that even early Christians had and other Christian sects have had throughout time, but the very real reality that heaven was not a place for me, I had already started to grasp, but that possibility that there may not be an afterlife was a whole nother idea.
Right.
And that was scary to me. Like, wait, you mean we just die?
Yeah, I
right?
think I had a similar kind of freak out moment, to be honest, or maybe not moment, like probably lasted a while until I could wrap my head around something else. But yeah, like realizing, well, hell isn't a place. And then also understanding that those passages used in Revelation to paint this streets of gold thing, it was all hyperbolic writing, and it was allegorical because they were trying to speak in code. I don't know if you know this, but I learned this through the Bible for Normal People. And it's a podcast that I think I recommended on our resource thing, a resource episode. Check it out. But it was allegorical, hyperbolic writing to get a message across to the listeners of the day that would understand they were talking about the current political regime and the things that were happening. And it was not meant to be a prophetic book for our day. All those things that were written about in this really weird, descriptive, can't make sense of these pictures that they're, describing. It was all to paint this picture so that people could understand they were talking about, Nero. Like, 666 was representative of the letters that were used to spell Nero, but, like, with whatever, their alphabet system, it was a code, and, so, yeah, like, we try to literalize that and make sense of it to apply to our current experience, but it doesn't work because all those things that were prophesied actually happened in that
Mhm.
lifetime of the writers. And so
Right.
anyway, once I realized that and let go of that as the possibility of the future, I was like, well, shit. I was really looking forward to that mansion and the
Mhm.
possibility of it being better than I could possibly imagine because, like I said, I thought it was gonna kinda suck in some ways, but I also was, like, very excited about it because I was very much like, especially on the mission field, it was hard. It was a really hard way of living, and I would constantly, like, kind of soothe myself with this thought of, "But heaven's gonna be amazing," right? Like, "This sucks, but heaven it's gonna be worth it." But, like, there was always this, like, kind of consolation dialogue going on in me at all times, and when that was removed, I was like, "Okay, now what do I do with that?" And it took me a while to be okay with that. It felt like somebody ripped my security blanket away from me. But I finally come to grips with that, and then in that meantime, like I said, like, giving myself permission to think about what is the afterlife gonna look like? I don't know. Nobody can say. There's no proof. There's no proof for
Mhm.
any of this. So that's why
Right.
it's so fun. Yeah.
Near-death experiences seem to
Yes.
be, like, some of the closest things that I know of that we can get to, and then there is some science, I think, with, brain waves after death, maybe it's been a while since I've researched that, so don't quote me on that one, but and that's the other thing, and we probably need to have a disclaimer at the beginning of each episode that says, "We're just regular lay people that read shit on the internet."
Exactly. Exactly.
And read books and listen to people who know more than us, and we just are regurgitating it, we're digesting it together
Right.
is all we're doing.
Right.
And
People are just eavesdropping on our conversations, basically.
right, that are going there are real people who know what they're talking about that are listening going, "Oh, well, maybe it's sorta like that, but not
Right.
really," It's like, it's probably really hard to listen to us. But the thing about the Hebrew way of thinking about heaven, which I will add to what I was saying earlier, is that they didn't believe in heaven. Heaven wasn't for humans. It wasn't for people. They believed that there was a resting place that we went, and then when God restored, basically he was restoring heaven and earth. And so humans would be restored with and would live on a new earth, and heaven would be restored as well, and no longer Satan and all of his angels, fallen angels, would be annihilated, right?
Mm,
So there would be this restart kind of thing, and everything would be recycled in a sense because souls would get to come back, bodies would be remade, the earth is remade. It's like it's everything's being repurposed in this scenario in the Hebrew perspective. And so that to me was a beautiful idea. Like, oh, there because heaven, every time you hear the word heaven in scripture, and oh God, I know somebody's gonna probably catch me in a half truth on this one, but Um,
All of scripture
that
is
I
a
know of.
half truth. Come on.
Right. I know, right?
There's a reason we're called heretical hippies. So
So true. So really we can say whatever we
just
want
lean
about
into
scripture.
that.
That's
Lean into
probably
it.
gonna I know, right? So yeah, there's no heaven for us. It is a new earth for us.
Mm,
And this is really probably the most sound scriptural explanation of the afterlife, in my opinion. A lot of people talk about what about, Jesus, or what about the Jesus when he was talking to the man on the cross next to him and he's like, today I promise you you'll be with me in paradise. And it's like there's a lot of speculation about like what that actually meant, and it doesn't actually mean heaven, and so on and so forth, right? So there's speculation that you can make even with scripture,
right.
is I guess my
Yeah,
point.
exactly. Yeah, and it's funny because every now and then I'll find myself coming back to, right, fill in the blank scripture, right, for maybe not afterlife, but anything, any kind of esoteric thought. That's kind of my
Right.
default, right? Like I'm trying to
Mhm.
rewire my brain. I'm getting there. I'm making progress, but I will come back and be like, well, what about that one verse? And then
Uh-huh.
I maybe ponder it for a couple of minutes, but then I'm like, oh shit, girl, like here we go. And like I kind of forget that I've done away with thinking that scripture is accurate, or like that
Mhm.
even the gospels, there's speculation too that the gospels were, I mean, they actually were written many decades after the life of Jesus, but there's also speculation that the writers of them were trying to prove a point about who Jesus was. So who's to say that he even did all those miracles that were written down? I mean, they were kind of like exaggerating his divinity to prove a point. And so like then
Sure.
I remember that I'm like, oh well, the people writing those things, they all had their agendas and they had their biases, and it's just like us today. So like yeah, I find myself going back to scripture and being like, well, what about when it says this? And I'm
Mm.
trying to like stop that mental process sooner and sooner as that comes up. Just to
Sure.
leave space for the speculation, to leave space for the I don't know, the shrug, the I don't know, and does it matter? I don't know if it really matters, but it can be fun to think about that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do that too. My brain is trained, you know, to what about this scripture? What about that scripture? My brain is trained to consider what the scripture says in all
And
situations.
use that as the plumb line for
Mhm.
everything. And so, yeah, like I'm
Right.
trying to shift the plumb line or maybe just like yank it out altogether and not have one. Um,
Yes.
but to leave space for the mysterious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there
Yeah.
any other kind of afterlife considerations that you've made? I want to know.
Yeah, so we're encroaching upon an hour here. Maybe we could pause and then
Yeah. So,
okay, because I feel like this next half is gonna probably be even more interesting than the first.
okay, yeah, we have discussed a lot about kind of where we began with our afterlife understanding and some of the different thought processes that we've engaged in. But we're going to jump into more in depth of even wilder speculations. So we're going to wrap this part up. It's going to be part 1, and then we will see you at part 2. But until then, peace out,
Peace out,
MFers.
MFers.
Well, friends, that wraps up this heretical episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to rate and review our podcast and share with anyone who would be encouraged. See you next time.